Don Crane and the 2nd Amphibious Tractor Battalion were among the first group of Marines to land on Red Beach 2 at Tarawa. He wore the appearance of one of Tarawa's legendary heroes, yet no history book has ever mentioned his name. This is the story of Don Crane, an unknown American hero who drove a first-wave Amtrak directly into the heart of the deadly battle at Tarawa, landing on what would become one of the bloodiest and most heavily defended beaches in the Pacific during World War II. In October 1941, Don Crane turned 17. Instead of a typical celebration, he walked straight into a Marine Corps recruitment station, determined to enlist. His older brothers, despite being taller and stronger, had all failed the Marine physical for various reasons. At the time, the Marines enforced a quota system, allowing only a limited number of recruits each month from states like Montana. Don was rejected 3 times due to this system, but after the attack on Pearl Harbor, the restrictions were lifted. His long-awaited birthday wish finally came true, and in January 1942, he officially joined the United States Marine Corps, one among thousands of young men answering their country's call. After completing 6 weeks of boot camp in San Diego, Don Crane became a United States Marine. Though he expected to face conflict with the Japanese, he couldn't have imagined the scale of the battles he would fight or the human cost that would follow. In October 1942, Don was deployed to New Zealand with the 2nd Marine Division's Special Weapons Platoon, specifically assigned to B Battery. The voyage across the Pacific took 22 days aboard the USS President Monroe. Most of the journey was monotonous, but one event stood out. A thrilling announcement broke over the ship's loudspeaker. They had spotted ships on the horizon and initially feared the Japanese Navy. Instead, it was the rescue of famed World War I fighter ace Eddie Rickenbacker, who had been adrift in the Pacific for 24 days after ditching his B-17 Flying Fortress. That moment injected a sense of awe and urgency into the young Marine's journey. When the Monroe arrived in New Zealand, Don and his fellow Marines enjoyed the warm welcome of the locals. However, orders came down from the Joint Chiefs of Staff for the 2nd Marine Division to seize the Japanese-held atoll of Tarawa in the Gilbert Islands. In July 1943, Lieutenant Colonel David Shoup, the operations officer for the 2nd Division, faced 2 daunting challenges. First, a wide, shallow coral reef around the island would prevent the standard landing craft, Higgins boats, from getting close enough to the beach. Second, the island's defenses were formidable, with fortified Japanese positions bristling along the shore. Shoup came up with a bold idea. Instead of using Higgins boats, the Marines would lead an amphibious assault using the first-generation landing vehicle tracked, or LVT-1. These amphibious tractors were originally designed for supply runs, not frontline assaults. They were underpowered and thinly armored, yet Shoup saw their potential to get troops across the reef and onto the heavily defended beaches. This innovative decision would change the course of the Pacific War and alter Don Crane's life forever. In August 1943, Don was assigned to Seek Company of the 2nd Amphibious Tractor Battalion. Despite having no prior experience with amphibious vehicles, he was immediately fascinated by the $35,000 23-ton machine. He quickly began intensive training to become an LVT-1 driver. In less than 3 months, he would find himself behind the controls of one of the first-wave Amtraks, set to crash into Tarawa's reef under enemy fire. In late October, Don's LVT-1 and 9 others were hoisted onto the weather deck of the assault transport USS Virgo in Wellington, New Zealand. Each was outfitted with 3 machine guns, a layer of steel plating for added protection, and a white number, 41, painted on both the cab and the rear of the vehicle. Before heading into battle, the troops stopped at the New Hebrides for 2 days of practice landings. When one LVT broke down, Don helped bring it back to the Virgo. On November 13, 1943, the USS Virgo left for Tarawa. The Marines were informed of their objective the next day. Few of the men had heard of Tarawa, fewer still knew what awaited them. The officers briefed them with confidence. According to the intelligence reports, the island's defenders would be completely destroyed by the bombardment. The Japanese would be finished, crying for their mothers, they were told. The reality would be far different. Don was ordered to carry 20 Marines from the 2nd Regiment ashore on Red Beach 2 in the first wave of the assault. The beach was a fortress. Japanese defenders had constructed gun pits hidden behind rows of concrete tetrahedrons, barbed wire stretched across the reef, sandbagged machine gun positions atop a stone seawall, and strong points reinforced with coconut logs. The defenders were battle-hardened members of the Japanese Imperial Navy's elite 7th Special Naval Landing Force. Their mission was clear: annihilate every American who set foot on the island. In the early hours of November 20th, 1943, the USS Virgo was cloaked in darkness as it approached Tarawa. Don remembered lying awake, praying, and trying to eat steak and eggs before heading into battle. Once his LVT-1 was lowered into the sea, Don maneuvered it toward the rendezvous point. Marines from Higgins boats transferred over into the waiting Amtraks. Though designed to carry 18 men, LVT-41 was packed with 20 fully armed Marines. Crammed together shoulder to shoulder in the cargo hold, the men stood soaked by ocean waves that splashed over the vehicle's low sides. At 6:48 a.m., the first wave of 42 LVT-1s formed up into lines. Don's vehicle, LVT-41, was positioned just to the right of center in the first line, placing him directly in the path of the fiercest resistance on Red Beach 2. As the Amtraks moved toward the reef under a rising sun, Don Crane drove headfirst into the firestorm that would become one of the costliest assaults of the Pacific Campaign. At that moment, Don had no idea what lay ahead of him. He was focused on steering his vehicle through the lagoon channel, battling strong headwinds and a pulling current. Guided only by the searchlight of the minesweeper pursuit, he pressed on. His vehicle, the LVT-41, was about 9 miles from the departure point, making his journey the longest from ship to shore of any landing in the Pacific theater of the war. What he didn't know was that he was heading directly into one of the most intense and deadly concentrations of Japanese firepower that the Marines had ever faced. Inside the LVT, Don remained behind the controls for hours, unaware that a terrifying storm of destruction was about to begin. Just before sunrise, the calm was shattered as U.S. Navy battleships opened fire. The noise was deafening, like giant freight trains ripping through the sky. Massive 16-inch shells rained down on the island, exploding in fire, sand, and debris. The bombardment went on for over 3 hours. After the battleships paused, carrier aircraft swooped in to bomb and strafe the target. Through the narrow viewing slit in the LVT's armored cab, Don saw his first glimpse of the island, Bitio, one of the small parts of Tarawa Atoll. His heart lifted briefly when he saw the chaos on the island. Smoke and flames were everywhere. It looked like nothing could have survived the Navy's assault. Bitio looked like a burning graveyard, covered in smoke and fire. As Don pushed the LVT forward, he thought it was unlikely that any Japanese troops could still be alive. But just in case, he kept his reliable Springfield M1903 rifle nearby on the deck. Right behind him, manning one of the LVT's 50 caliber machine guns, was Lieutenant Bonnie Little. Little had once written a letter to his wife saying that what scared Marines the most wasn't dying, it was failing to do their duty. As Don watched the smoke slowly lift in the morning breeze, a strange chill went down his spine. The island, now revealed, looked eerie and menacing. Hidden from Don's sight, Japanese soldiers were waiting in well-built bunkers and concrete pillboxes, watching the incoming Marines through their gun sights, ready to strike the moment they got close. Around 24 minutes later, from about 6,000 yards offshore, the first wave of landing vehicles turned toward the island. The water behind them foamed white as they sped forward. Don heard the command to lock and load. In the cargo area behind him, the Marines pushed the safeties off their rifles and slammed 8-round clips into their M1 Garands, chambering the first rounds. Lieutenant Little pulled back the machine gun lever to ready it, then released it again, preparing for battle. Their mission was clear: get to the beach fast, eliminate any remaining resistance, and take control of the island. Don had another task: to safely deliver the Marines in his vehicle to the shore. He pushed the 150-horsepower Hercules engine as hard as it could go, managing to squeeze out about 3.5 knots of speed as they approached Red Beach 2. To stay on course, he had to guide the LVT west of a long pier. But the strong currents dragged him farther to the right than he had planned. For a few moments, everything was quiet. Neither side fired. Both the Japanese and the Americans held their breath, waiting. The Marines had no clear targets, and to avoid friendly fire, the Navy's planes and ships had stopped shooting. Suddenly, Japanese artillery burst overhead. Airburst shells exploded near Don's vehicle, showering it with shrapnel as it got closer to shore. Any hope of an easy landing was gone. Don adjusted his helmet and glanced at his assistant driver on the right and his radio operator on the left. All around them, LVTs were slowing down. They had hit the coral reef. But instead of stopping, they kept going. The Japanese had overestimated how effective the reef would be in stopping the vehicles. The Americans, on the other hand, had placed too much faith in their pre-invasion bombardment. The Japanese were still there, and very much alive. The LVTs crawled over the reef, climbing onto the coral and sand. The Japanese were stunned at first by the sight of the strange amphibious vehicles moving forward. But once they recovered, they unleashed a brutal wall of bullets and shells. The flaws in the American bombardment became obvious. Many Japanese troops had survived in their underground positions, and their weapons were still fully functional. Don felt like a target in a shooting gallery. With no planes or Navy guns covering them, his LVT scrambled across the open reef, its tracks digging into the sand and coral, trying to speed up. They were about 800 yards from the beach. To the left, near the pier, he saw tracer rounds slicing through the air, punching holes in the LVT's sides and front. On the right, a grounded ship was firing heavily at them. Then, tragedy struck. The assistant driver and radio operator were both killed by enemy fire. Don, still gripping the steering levers tightly, kept the LVT moving, heading toward the gap between Red Beaches 1 and 2. This area was known among the Marines as the Pocket, a deadly zone packed with resistance. It was the last stronghold of organized Japanese defense and would take 3 days of brutal combat to defeat. Unaware of just how dangerous this path was, Don drove straight into it. Later, engineers would reveal that the armor on the LVT's cab had been tested back in New Zealand. It was so thin that a regular M1 rifle round could shoot straight through it. But the Marines hadn't been told that before the invasion. It would have been too disheartening. The cargo hold where the Marines were packed offered almost no protection, not even from the cab's steel plates. Lieutenant Little died that day, living up to what he had written to his wife, fighting not out of fear of death, but from fear of failing to do his job. Don later said he was so focused on driving that he didn't notice everything happening behind him, but he knew Little was using the machine gun until the very end. As Don continued pushing forward, with a fallen crew member on either side of him, the LVT was hit again and again by machine guns and near misses from 75mm guns. After crossing the reef and getting about halfway to the beach, the Amtrak's engine suddenly died. Don was so focused on getting them to shore that he hadn't noticed what had happened behind him. When he finally realized it, he was devastated. The Marines in the cargo hold had all been killed. He wasn't sure whether they died all at once or one after the other as LVT-41 pushed across the exposed reef. All he knew was that when he crawled out from between the 2 dead Marines inside the cab, he saw the grim sight of 18 more dead Marines in the cargo hold. Only 3 people made it out alive: the maintenance sergeant, a Marine rifleman, and himself. Both of the others were injured, and they were unarmed when they jumped over the edge into the water and made their way to the back of the tractor. Everything in the cargo hold, men and equipment, had been destroyed. History books correctly record that the use of LVTs at Tarawa was a tactical success. Out of the 42 LVTs in the first wave, only 8 were destroyed before reaching the beach. Don Crane knew firsthand what it was like to be on one of those 8. Of the 23 men in his tractor, only 3 survived. He came out without a scratch and felt that he was shielded by God. It was strangely fitting that Don, a pioneer of modern amphibious assault, ended up landing through the surf just like the Marines did during their first amphibious landing back in 1776. Don refused to abandon the 2 injured Marines. He stayed with them until nightfall, helped them reach a low seawall, and later joined the rest of the Marines in liberating the island from the Japanese. The battle lasted 76 hours and was brutally costly for both sides. Don said he could only remember about 6 or 7% of what happened on Tarawa. He tried to forget the rest, but the horrible smell of the dead and the noise were impossible to erase from memory. He also remembered a Marine who was shot in the throat. A medic saved his life by making a slit in his trachea and inserting a thermometer casing to help him breathe. Of nearly 4,000 Japanese defenders, only 17 survived. The Marines lost 1,027 men and had 2,292 wounded. Red Beach 2, where Don had tried to land, was attacked by 3 of the hardest-hit Marine units and became one of the bloodiest landing sites of the war. Don's battalion lost half of its men, and 90 of the 123 LVTs deployed were either destroyed or disabled. 6 of the 8 LVT-1s destroyed in the first wave were lost trying to land on Red Beach 2, including Don's own vehicle. 3 of the 4 Medals of Honor awarded for heroism at Tarawa were given to Marines who fought on Red Beach 2, Lieutenant Colonel Shoup, Lieutenant William Dean Hawkins, and Sergeant Bill Bordelon. Don described Red Beach 2 as the bloodiest landing site of World War II, while Tarawa became the deadliest yard-for-yard battle for the Marines. He said the stench of nearly 6,000 rotting corpses could be smelled from miles away. Don had landed with only the clothes on his back, expecting to return to the ship the same day. But after the battle, his uniform was in ruins. Searching for something clean, he found a pack belonging to Lieutenant Alexander Bonnyman. Inside was a fresh pair of dungarees. Don didn't know who Bonnyman was at the time, only that he had died. Years later, he attended a ceremony at Punch Bowl Cemetery in Hawaii, where Bonnyman's name was honored for his extraordinary bravery at Tarawa. Don later met Bonnyman's sister and told her that he had worn her brother's clothes. She said she was happy her brother had helped a Marine, even in death. Bonnyman had been awarded the Medal of Honor for his role in seizing a heavily fortified Japanese position behind Red Beach 3. Don spent 19 days on the island after the battle, helping recover LVTs and unloading Army garrison troops, all while wearing Bonnyman's uniform to keep the Marines' new tactics hidden from the enemy. News about the LVT's success was kept quiet right after the battle. Later, Don made 14 supply runs on Tinian, earned a Bronze Star for his actions at Saipan, and survived an explosion at Pearl Harbor while aboard an LST heading to Saipan. Returning to the story, the narrator reflects that despite dying at Tarawa before they were born, Don Crane has always been honored in their family. The family knew that he had proudly enlisted and that many Marines understood they might have to give their lives. Don is still remembered as a true hero. The narrator expresses gratitude for the image used in a banner, noting that it was taken by their grandfather, Arthur John Strange, who served with the 2nd Marines. They believe it is now an official Marine Corps photo preserved in the National Archives. The brave men who fought at Tarawa will always be remembered as heroes. God bless America. The narrator also mentions their uncle Alexander Pa'a, who took part in the battle as a member of the 3rd Battalion, 6th Marine Regiment, 2nd Marine Division. He fought at Tarawa, Saipan, and Tinian. He was killed in action on July 30th, 1944, just 2 days before Tinian was declared secure. Their grandfather, Donald Crane, passed away a few years ago, and they deeply miss him. Discovering articles about him is always interesting. He was a great patriot and hero until the day he died. They feel fortunate to have heard many of his stories firsthand, and are thankful those stories are being shared. The Battle of Tarawa was just 76 hours long, but for the brave souls who fought there, it left a lifetime of scars, both visible and unseen. Men like Don Crane didn't just survive, they carried the memories of their fallen brothers for decades, reliving those 31 seconds of hell over and over. From crawling over bodies in a shattered amphibious tractor to wearing a fallen hero's uniform, Don's story is one of grit, duty, and quiet patriotism. Even in death, heroes like Lieutenant Alexander Bonnyman continued to serve their fellow Marines. And even after the war, men like Don carried on, through sacrifice, through silence, and through stories told to their children and grandchildren. To remember Tarawa is to remember the cost of freedom. It's to honor the blood-soaked sand, the charred metal of LVTs, and the courage it took to keep pushing forward under relentless fire. We remember them, not just for what they gave, but for who they were.